Ruby and Minnie lived in Panguitch, which is about 30 miles from here, and their families lived in Panguitch. And it was at a time when it was still possible to homestead. And Ruby saw an opportunity to ranch out on this plateau. And so he was able to come out and stake out his own homestead. That's what brought him to Bryce Canyon.
It was a tough life. I can remember Dad telling me one time when they first come out, and they just had the boards standing up and had like 3/8 inch cracks in between the boards. And they said they about froze to death that night because that cold wind and snow was blowing on them. And the next day they went up to a sawmill not too far from here and got some old slats and put over the holes so they wouldn't freeze to death.
You just kind of have to hand it to them that they were ambitious and knowledgeable and willing to do the work it took to survive.
And then, of course, the family story goes that a cousin stopped by to visit with him and said, well, have you been up to see Bryce Canyon? And he said, no, what's that? And he said, well, it's a big hole in the ground, but you really ought to see it. So then one day they got in their buggy and worked their way up to what is now Sunset Point. And they walked out, and all of a sudden they looked over and saw what their cousin was talking about and realized that it was way more than a hole in the ground, that it was a spectacular view and something that the whole world should see. And so they started telling their friends.
There's just no other place like it. There's a lot of other beautiful places along our all-American road here too, but there's no place else in the world quite like Bryce Canyon.
I'm amazed at what, if you'll really watch, how it changes and what you see every time. You can't take it all in.
Bryce is personal. It's almost like you can touch it. So many people have told me that Bryce Canyon is their favorite park in Utah.
So he came back to his ranch and he kind of came up with a plan, and he wrote letters to the state of Utah and he said, I want to serve these visitors that are coming to see Bryce's Canyon. And he got permission to build a small building they called the Tourist Rest up at the Sunset Point.
And that was the very beginning. And to think about that humble start of his friends and associates helping him cut the logs and build the building.
He made a bathtub out of a great big log. He hollowed it out so people could take a bath there in it. And they had a swing out there in the trees so the kids could swing and everything, and they just had a nice little camp out thing up there.
I think they were natural marketers because everything you see had their name prominently on it or a map prominently on it.
One thing that really tickled me, he said, we only had a sheet between some of the rooms upstairs. He said, so the thing you had to do is hurry up and eat your supper, get up there and get ready for bed and get in bed and turn out your light. So, so you could watch through the sheet and they wasn't watching you or something like that. It was kind of funny. He always had some funny way of telling us about what was going on.
For the next few years, he served visitors as they come into Bryce, and when they made it a national monument, unfortunately, the National Park Service was partnering with the Union Pacific Railroad, so the Union Pacific Railroad was building all these national park lodges, the old historic lodges, and they came in and they looked where Ruby was and they said, this is where we want to put our lodge, and here's a little bit of money for your water rights in your lodge, and kind of showed him the door, so to speak.
And they decided to move back to their ranch. Now, they were probably a little disappointed that all that work went down the drain, but he was able to come back, and I'm sure they had time to think about, well, we started having visitors come. How do we continue that business?
Of course, one of the first things he did is he went and approached the National Park Service about where they were going to put the road to the canyon. And he, of course, at the time, he had this ranch right here, and he said, I will give you the property across my land, across my ranch, if you build the road here.
And I think that probably would be the beginning of hatching the plan to develop a lodge And so the new lodge became what they called Ruby's Inn.